You ever feel like you're running in circles? Like no matter what you do or where you go, you end up back at the same place, just a little more tired and a little more broken? That's been my life for as long as I can remember. My name's Max, and if you've ever driven down Route 66, you know it's littered with ghosts. Of people, dreams, and places that time forgot. I was one of those ghosts. A drifter with no plan, no roots, and no real ambition. Just a beat-up old truck and a few dollars to my name. I'd spent years bouncing from job to job, flipping burgers and cleaning grease traps in run-down diners across the country. But nothing prepared me for the MIDPOINT Cafe. It was late, maybe 2 a.m., and I was running on fumes, both literally and metaphorically. The stretch of Route 66 I was on was empty, just an endless ribbon of asphalt cutting through the dark. My truck's gas gauge was hovering dangerously close to E, and I hadn't seen a gas station in miles. That's when I saw it, a flicker of neon in the distance. The sign read, MIDPOINT Cafe, the heart of Route 66. The building itself looked like it had been plucked straight out of the 1950s and left to decay. The paint was peeling, the windows were grimy, and the neon lights buzzed faintly, casting an eerie glow on the cracked pavement. Something about the place didn't feel right, but desperation has a way of making you ignore your gut. I pulled into the parking lot, grabbed my tattered backpack, and stepped inside. The air hit me first, thick, greasy, and stale, like it had been trapped there for decades. The diner was empty, save for an old man standing behind the counter. He looked like he'd been part of the place since it opened, with a face that was more wrinkles than skin, and eyes that seemed to pierce right through you. "Help you, son?" he rasped, his voice rough like sandpaper. "I'm looking for work," I blurted out before I could stop myself. "You got anything?" The old man eyed me for a long moment before nodding. "You ever worked a grill?" "Plenty of times," I said. It wasn't a lie. I'd been cooking since I was a teenager. "I can start tonight if you need me." He chuckled, a dry, hollow sound that made my skin crawl. "Good. We've been needing someone. But there are rules." "Rules?" He didn't answer. Instead, he handed me a spatula. It was bent and worn, the metal darkened from years of use. As soon as I touched it, I felt something. A faint vibration, like the spatula was alive. The old man leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Follow the rules, or the diner will take more than your paycheck." The old man didn't waste any time explaining the job. He led me behind the counter to the grill, which looked ancient, almost like it had been carved out of the earth itself. Grease stains marred every inch of the kitchen, and the air was thick with the smell of burnt meat and old oil. The flickering fluorescent light overhead buzzed like an angry hornet, casting shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. "This is it," the old man said, tapping the bent spatula against the edge of the grill. "MIDPOINT Cafe's heart and soul." I raised an eyebrow. "Looks like every other grill I've worked on." He ignored the comment and handed me a worn-out notebook. Its cover was stained with grease, and the pages were yellowed and brittle, as if they might disintegrate if I handled them too roughly. Scribbled in black ink on the inside cover were the words, "Do not break the rules." "Read it," the old man said. His tone had shifted, becoming sharper, almost commanding. I opened the notebook to the first page and began reading. Rule 1. The grill must always be preheated for exactly 5 minutes, not 4, not 6. Use the timer on the wall. Rule 2. If a customer orders a burger, make sure the patty never touches the edges of the grill. Keep it centered. Rule 3. Never, under any circumstances, serve food to anyone who doesn't place an order. Rule 4. The clock above the counter will stop at 3:17 a.m. If it does, lock the doors and wait until it starts again. Do not look outside. Rule 5. If the grill starts smoking without a heat source, turn off the lights and leave the kitchen immediately. Wait 5 minutes before returning. Rule 6. At the end of your shift, clean the spatula and place it exactly where you found it. If you don't, you'll hear the sizzle even when the grill is cold. Rule 7. Never question the customers. Serve them and keep your head down. I looked up at the old man, trying to keep my voice steady. Is this some kind of joke? His expression didn't change. Those rules have kept this place running for decades. Break one, and you'll find out why. Find out what? He didn't answer. Instead, he handed me an apron and pointed to the grill. You're on until sunrise. Good luck. Before I could argue, he turned and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the dimly lit diner. I stared at the rules, my stomach churning. Something about them felt wrong. But I was too tired, too broke, and too desperate to care. I turned on the grill, setting the timer for exactly 5 minutes. As the metal heated, the spatula in my hand seemed to hum faintly, a vibration that traveled up my arm and settled in my chest. I shook it off and got to work, cleaning the counter and preparing for customers. The first order came at 2:03 a.m. A man in a suit stepped into the diner, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. He slid into a booth near the window and spoke without looking at me. Double cheeseburger, no pickles. I nodded and turned to the grill. The patty sizzled as it hit the surface, and I found myself obsessively centering it, keeping it far from the edges. When the burger was done, I plated it and brought it to the man. Enjoy, I said, trying to sound cheerful. He didn't respond, just lifted the burger to his mouth and took a slow, deliberate bite. I returned to the counter, wiping my hands on the apron, and tried not to think about how his shadow didn't quite match his movements. The clock ticked loudly in the silence, each second dragging on like an eternity. I glanced at it, half expecting it to stop at 3:17, but it kept ticking for now. I told myself the rules were just an elaborate hazing ritual, something to scare off new hires. But deep down, I knew better. By 2:30 a.m., the diner had settled into an eerie quiet. The man in the suit had finished his burger, left a crumpled bill on the table, and disappeared into the night without a word. The sound of his footsteps on the pavement outside echoed for far too long, fading unnaturally slowly, as if the darkness itself was swallowing the noise. I was back at the grill, absently wiping down the counter, when I noticed the spatula. It was still vibrating faintly in my hand, that same odd hum I'd felt earlier. I told myself it was just my nerves. After all, this was just another diner job, right? Nothing I hadn't handled before. But then the clock above the counter caught my eye. I froze, mid-swipe, watching the second hand tick, tick, tick closer to the top of the hour. 3:17 a.m. The rule about the clock burned in my mind. I couldn't look away. I told myself it wouldn't stop, that it was just some old superstitious nonsense. And yet, a cold bead of sweat ran down my back as the second hand ticked closer. When it finally hit 3:17, I held my breath. The clock didn't stop. It kept ticking like normal. I exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping my lips. See? Just stupid rules, I muttered, half convincing myself. Then, the diner lights flickered. Just once, but it was enough to make my pulse jump. The buzz of the fluorescent lights faltered, and the shadows around the edges of the diner seemed to shift, creeping closer to the center of the room. I glanced at the clock again, 3:18 a.m., and tried to tell myself everything was fine. That's when I heard it. A faint rhythmic tapping coming from the front door. Not a knock, just a tap, tap, tap. like someone was drumming their fingers against the glass. I stiffened, my hand tightening around the spatula. The rule about not looking outside flashed in my head like a neon sign. "Don't look," I whispered to myself. "Just don't look." But curiosity is a dangerous thing, and the tapping wasn't stopping. I moved toward the door, each step hesitant, the spatula still clutched in my hand like a weapon. The windows were fogged up from the night's chill, and I couldn't see clearly outside. "Hello?" I called out, my voice wavering. No response. The tapping continued, steady and insistent. The shadows in the diner seemed to grow darker, heavier, pressing in around me. My chest felt tight, my breathing shallow. The spatula in my hand vibrated harder, the hum growing louder, almost like a warning. I stopped a few feet from the door, heart pounding, and forced myself to turn back to the counter. "Rule number 4, I muttered. "Lock the doors." I darted back behind the counter, fumbled with the keys, and locked the door without looking outside. The tapping stopped the moment the lock clicked into place, but the silence that followed was worse. It was thick, suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the room. I stood there for what felt like hours, clutching the spatula, staring at the clock. 3:23 a.m. My hands were shaking, and the buzzing in my ears drowned out every other sound. Then, the grill hissed. Not the sound of grease on a hot surface. It was sharper, more aggressive, like something was scraping against the metal. The spatula in my hand grew warm, almost burning, and I dropped it with a yelp. It clattered to the floor, and for a split second, I swore I saw a face reflected in the shiny surface of the grill. Not my face. Something else. I backed away, my legs trembling, and stared at the grill. The hissing stopped, and the diner fell silent once more. I didn't touch the spatula again that night. The diner remained unnervingly quiet after the incident with the grill. I stayed behind the counter, avoiding the spatula and keeping my distance from the locked front door. My eyes kept darting to the clock, watching each second crawl by. It was nearing 4 a.m., and I silently prayed for the shift to end without any more disturbances. The sound of the doorbell chiming shattered the silence. My head snapped up, and I stared at the entrance. The door was still locked. No one had come in, but the bell had rung as clearly as if someone had opened it. "Hello?" My voice echoed in the empty space, and I regretted speaking immediately. The air felt charged, like the diner itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Then I heard it, a raspy voice from one of the booths. "Coffee, black." I froze. The voice hadn't come from the direction of the door. It came from the corner booth, shrouded in the diner's dim light. Slowly, I turned toward it. The booth was empty, but the coffee cup that I'd wiped clean earlier was now sitting on the table, a faint trail of steam rising from it. The spatula vibrated on the counter, rattling like a tuning fork. I backed away, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck rise. The rule about never serving food to anyone who doesn't place an order replayed in my mind. Technically, this counted as an order, didn't it? But there was no one there. Just an empty booth and a cup of coffee that hadn't been there a moment ago. The coffee cup began to slide across the table on its own, inching toward the edge. The lights flickered again, and I swore I saw a shadow dart across the room. Not the shadow of a person. Something wrong. It moved too quickly, too fluidly, like smoke being sucked into a vacuum. "Who's there?" My voice cracked. The only response was the faint sound of tapping, this time coming from inside the kitchen. I turned toward the grill and my stomach twisted into knots. The spatula was no longer on the counter. It was now lying across the grill, sizzling against the hot metal even though I hadn't turned the heat back on. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, echoing from all around me. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to take slow, deep breaths. "You're just tired," I muttered. "It's nothing. Just finish your shift." But when I turned back to the counter, the coffee cup was gone. In its place was a folded napkin with something scrawled on it in thick black ink. I picked it up with trembling hands and read the message, "Don't forget the rules." My blood ran cold. The rules. I hadn't broken any, had I? I replayed the last hour in my mind, searching for any misstep, but nothing stood out. Yet the message felt like a warning, or a threat. The bell chimed again. This time, I didn't look at the door. I grabbed the spatula off the grill, ignoring the burning heat, and shoved it into the sink. The smell of grease filled the air, sharp and metallic, as I ran water over the metal. The lights flickered one last time before steadying, and the clock above the counter ticked past 4 a.m. For the rest of the shift, I refused to look at the booths or the grill. The spatula remained in the sink, its faint vibration subsiding as the hours crawled by. By the time the sun rose, I was counting the seconds until I could leave. By the time the first faint rays of dawn filtered through the diner's windows, my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. I had spent the last few hours in a state of hyper-awareness, jumping at every creak of the floorboards and flicker of the lights. The spatula sat in the sink, silent and still, but its presence felt oppressive. I couldn't bring myself to touch it again. Just as I started counting the seconds until the end of my shift, a sharp knock echoed through the diner. It came from the window nearest the counter. My breath hitched, and I turned slowly, dread pooling in my stomach. A man stood outside, his face pressed against the glass. His features were pale and indistinct, blurred as if by fog, but his eyes were vivid and sharp, locked onto mine with an intensity that made my skin crawl. He raised a hand and knocked again, this time with more force. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he pointed toward the front door. For a brief moment, I considered unlocking it, anything to end this suffocating tension. But then the rules flashed through my mind, stark and unyielding. Never open the door for anyone outside after midnight, no matter what they say. I stepped back, putting the counter between us. "Sorry, we're closed." The man tilted his head, his mouth stretching into a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He raised his hand again, but this time, instead of knocking, he dragged his fingers down the glass. The sound was unbearable, a grating screech that set my teeth on edge. The glass trembled under his touch, and I half expected it to shatter. "Please leave," I said, louder this time. The man's smile widened, and he tapped the glass with one long, bony finger. The lights in the diner flickered, and for a split second, his reflection in the window didn't match his movements. While the man outside stood perfectly still, his reflection turned its head to look at me. My heart leaped into my throat. I stumbled back, nearly knocking over a stack of plates. The man's reflection opened its mouth, and though no sound came out, I understood what it was saying. "Let me in." "No," I whispered, clutching the counter for support. "I can't." The clock above the counter ticked loudly, the sound echoing like a hammer against my skull. The man's reflection didn't stop moving, its lips forming silent words I couldn't understand. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying he would leave. When I opened them again, he was gone. The window was empty, and the only sound was the faint hum of the diner's appliances. Relief flooded me, but it was short-lived. A napkin lay on the counter in front of me, where there had been nothing before. Written in the same thick black ink as the previous note were 2 words: "Look closer." I hesitated, my hands trembling as I picked up the napkin. Beneath it was a faint outline of something pressed into the counter's surface, like a child's crayon rubbing. I tilted my head, trying to make sense of it. It was a face, my face, etched into the counter, staring back at me with wide, terrified eyes. The spatula in the sink buzzed to life again, vibrating violently against the metal. I stepped back, my legs shaking, and pressed my back against the wall. Something was wrong. Terribly, terribly wrong. The napkin in my hand crumpled as I stared at the distorted face etched into the counter. My face. The air in the diner seemed to thicken, pressing down on me like a weight. I needed to get out of there, but something deep in my gut told me the diner wouldn't let me leave. Not yet. A loud clank broke the silence, and I spun toward the sound. It came from the freezer in the kitchen. The heavy metal door trembled, and frost-coated hinges groaned as if something, or someone, was trying to force it open from the inside. I edged toward the kitchen, each step hesitant and deliberate. My shoes squeaked against the tile floor, the sound echoing unnaturally in the stillness. When I reached the freezer, the door was still. No movement, no sound. Just the faint hum of the motor working overtime to keep the temperature low. I reached for the handle, my fingers hovering inches away. The rules flashed through my mind. Never open the freezer unless the temperature dial reads exactly 0 degrees Fahrenheit. I glanced at the dial. The needle hovered at -10 degrees Fahrenheit. Relief washed over me, an excuse not to open it. But then the knocking started. It was faint at first, a dull thud from within the freezer's depths. I froze, my heart racing. The knocking grew louder, more insistent, until it turned into full-blown pounding. The metal door rattled in its frame, the handle vibrating under the force. I stumbled back, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. "Who's there?" My voice cracked. The pounding stopped instantly. Silence filled the air, thick and suffocating. Then a voice, hoarse and ragged, whispered from behind the door. "Let me out." I backed away, shaking my head. "No, I can't." The voice changed, becoming deeper, more guttural. "Max, open the door." It knew my name. I clutched the counter for support, my knees threatening to give out. "You left me in here, Max," it growled. "Don't you remember?" The spatula in the sink clattered to the floor, and the lights in the diner dimmed. My eyes darted to the dial again, hoping for a miracle. The needle hadn't moved. "Max!" The voice was louder now, reverberating through the kitchen like a low growl. "You can't leave until you fix what you've done." "I didn't do anything," I shouted, my voice shaking. The freezer door buckled outward, as though something massive was throwing itself against it. I stumbled back, my head spinning. The spatula began to vibrate violently on the floor, the sound blending with the freezer's groans. Then everything stopped. The freezer door fell silent, the spatula stilled, and the lights returned to their usual dim glow. I stood there, my heart pounding, unsure whether to move or stay frozen in place. On the freezer door, frost had formed words, stark and clear. "You're next." The frost on the freezer door began to melt, the words, "You're next," smearing into unreadable streaks of condensation. My breathing was shallow, the air around me thick and cold. I couldn't move. My feet felt rooted to the ground, as if the diner itself was holding me in place. Finally, I tore my eyes away from the door and backed out of the kitchen. My legs felt weak, and my hands trembled as I clutched the edge of the counter for support. I needed answers, anything to make sense of what was happening. but the diner wasn't going to give them to me easily. The spatula lay on the floor where I'd dropped it, its metal glinting faintly in the dim light. I hesitated before picking it up, half expecting it to burn me or start vibrating again. Instead, it felt cold and lifeless in my hand. Too lifeless. I glanced around the diner, my gaze landing on the notebook Hank had left behind on my first night. I grabbed it and flipped through the pages, hoping for something, anything, that might explain the rules or the strange occurrences. Most of the pages were blank, but near the back, I found a set of notes scrawled in shaky handwriting. The diner isn't just a place. It's alive. It feeds on those who don't follow the rules. The spatula is the key. It's the tether. Lose it, and you're done. I swallowed hard, my hands gripping the notebook so tightly the edges of the paper began to crumple. The spatula hummed faintly in my other hand, as if it were agreeing with the words. Another entry caught my eye. They don't leave. Those who break the rules, they become part of it. Listen for the humming. When it stops, it's already too late. The words sent a chill down my spine. My mind flashed back to the man in the window, the coffee cup that appeared out of nowhere, the shadow that didn't match its owner. Were those the ones who had broken the rules? My stomach twisted at the thought. The jukebox started playing again, a scratchy, distorted tune that sent goosebumps crawling up my arms. It wasn't a song I recognized. The melody was slow and haunting, each note hanging in the air like a warning. I looked toward the corner where the jukebox stood. It wasn't plugged in. "Max!" The voice came from behind me. I spun around, the spatula raised like a weapon. No one was there. The diner was empty, the booths and tables bathed in the pale glow of the flickering lights. But I knew I wasn't alone. The air felt heavy, charged with something unseen but undeniable. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second dragging on like an eternity. My eyes flicked to it, and I froze. 3:17 a.m. The second hand stopped. The diner fell silent. Even the jukebox's haunting melody faded into nothingness. I backed away from the counter, my heart pounding. The notebook slipped from my hand, hitting the floor with a dull thud. The spatula began to hum again, the vibration traveling up my arm and into my chest. I gripped it tightly, my knuckles turning white. Then the knocking started. It wasn't from the front door this time. It came from the freezer. "Let me out," the voice growled, low and guttural. "You left me in here, Max. Don't you remember?" I shook my head, stepping back until my back hit the wall. I don't know what you're talking about." The freezer door rattled, the hinges groaning as though they were about to give way. The spatula in my hand grew warmer, the hum intensifying until it felt like my bones were vibrating. The lights flickered violently, plunging the diner into brief bursts of darkness. And then, with one final deafening crash, the freezer door burst open. The freezer door slammed open with a force that shook the entire kitchen. The sound reverberated through the diner, cutting through the oppressive silence like a thunderclap. A wave of freezing air poured out, chilling me to the bone. The smell hit me next, a mix of rotting meat and something metallic, like rusted iron. My legs refused to move as a figure stepped out from the darkened freezer. It wasn't human, not anymore. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs too long, its skin stretched thin over bones that jutted out at unnatural angles. Its head was tilted to one side, and its face, God, its face, was a patchwork of twisted features, like someone had tried to sculpt a person out of melted wax. The thing's eyes locked onto mine, empty sockets that burned with an unnatural light. Its mouth twisted into a grotesque grin, revealing jagged blackened teeth. When it spoke, Its voice was a rasping echo that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Max!" It hissed, drawing out my name like it was savoring the sound. "You didn't follow the rules." My grip on the spatula tightened. I did," I stammered, my voice barely above a whisper. "I followed all of them." The creature laughed, a hollow, bone-rattling sound. "Not all of them." I racked my brain, trying to remember if I'd missed anything. The rules were burned into my memory. The grill, the spatula, the doors, the freezer. But there was nothing I'd broken. I was sure of it. "Why me?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "I haven't done anything wrong." The creature tilted its head further, its neck creaking like an old door hinge. "It's not about you," it said. "It's about the diner, and the diner never lets go." The lights flickered again, plunging the room into bursts of darkness. Each time the lights came back, the creature was closer. First, it was standing in the doorway. Then, it was by the counter. Finally, it was right in front of me, its foul breath freezing against my skin. I swung the spatula instinctively, the metal slicing through the air. The creature recoiled slightly, hissing, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it reached out with one long clawed hand and grabbed the spatula. The vibration in the metal intensified, traveling up my arm and into my chest. I screamed as a searing pain shot through my body, like the spatula was burning me from the inside out. "You can't fight it," the creature whispered, its voice laced with dark amusement. "This place, it owns you now." I collapsed to my knees, the spatula falling from my hand. The creature loomed over me, its grin widening. It leaned in close, its breath icy against my ear. "You'll join the others," it said, just like Hank. The realization hit me like a freight train. Hank, the old man who had hired me, who had given me the rules. He wasn't just a worker, he was part of the diner, just like the others. The man in the window, the shadows, the whispers. They were all pieces of the diner, remnants of people who had failed to follow the rules or had been consumed by the diner's insatiable hunger. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. I won't become like them." The creature laughed again, a sound that made my blood run cold. "You already are." The spatula began to hum again, louder this time, until it drowned out every other sound. The lights flickered violently, and the diner seemed to twist and shift around me, the walls closing in like a living thing. When I opened my eyes, the creature was gone. The diner was silent, the lights steady. The freezer door was closed, and the spatula was back on the counter, gleaming as if it had never been touched. But something was different. The clock above the counter read 11 p.m., the exact time I had started my first shift. I stumbled to the door, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. It wouldn't budge. I turned back to the counter and saw it, a new notebook, clean and unblemished, sitting next to the spatula. My name was scrawled on the cover in black ink. I opened it, my hands shaking. The rules were the same, but the last page had a new addition. Rule 8, train the next hire. Pass on the spatula. If you fail, the diner will take you instead. A sharp knock at the door made me jump. I turned slowly, my heart pounding. Outside, a young man stood, his face weary and desperate. He looked like I had on my first night, lost, tired, and out of options. "Help wanted?" he called, his voice muffled through the glass. The diner's lights flickered, and the spatula hummed softly on the counter. I didn't want to open the door, but I knew I had no choice. The diner doesn't let go. The young man stepped inside, looking around nervously. I handed him the spatula and forced a smile, the weight of the diner's curse settling onto my shoulders. "Welcome to the Midpoint Cafe," I said. "Follow the rules, and you might make it through the night."